Welcome to Direct Supply's Continuing Education webinar series. Direct Supply offers monthly webinars on a variety of topics throughout the year. The topic for today is technology in the real world. My name is Robin Malik, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Please note, the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. Today's webinar will be presented by Gaurie, Rodman, and Patrick Mahoney. Gaurie Rodman is the Director of Development Services at Direct Supply and Aptura, an innovative firm that supports senior living renovation, construction, and new development projects from start to finish. In this role, Gaurie has developed a comprehensive development services offering. She also leads a cross-functional team to continually innovate and deliver Aptura's strategic planning, development management, and design-build services. Gaurie approaches senior living real estate development using her background of planning and architecture, which provides a unique perspective on delivering successful building projects. F. Patrick Mahoney, RCDD, CSI, CDT, is a senior technology designer for Direct Supply Aptura, where he specializes in the design and integration of wired and wireless technology systems for senior living facilities. With decades of experience in structured cabling, among other disciplines, he is well versed in security systems, audiovisual systems, and monitoring systems. He is a past recipient of the BICSI Larry G. Romig Award. He is also a member of the editorial review board for ICT Today magazine. And now, please welcome Patrick and Gaurie.
Thank you, Robin. Patrick and I are really excited to be discussing technology in the real world with you. As we all know, technology is an ever-changing component within our operations and within our facilities. We're going to walk you through what we're seeing not only in technology today, but innovation and growth, and how those advancements should be considered as you're planning for your new communities and your operations. And in order to create efficient buildings for senior living, they really need to integrate all components of innovation to them. So we're going to, in order to truly grasp what's happening in technology, we're going to begin by looking at the broader trends in senior living. Then we're going to talk to you about trends within technology. And then really the meat of the presentation is going to be about how they come together in senior living. So how do we prepare for technology? I've always come from a theory that in order for us to make good decisions about embracing innovation and new technologies and new concepts of even operations, you really need to know who you are, who you serve, and how you serve them. You also need to understand what your expectations are for the investments you put into your communities, what your expectations for your return on investments are. It will be difficult to vet opportunities out if you really don't come from that place of knowledge. Along with knowing who you are as an operator or a developer of communities, you also need to understand who you serve, those populations and what their expectations are and what their families' expectations are. And then how do those elements get supported via technology? Patrick?
We're going to break the vast area of technology into 4 areas within your buildings. Audio-visual, which are the systems that communicate with video and sound to the residents and staff in your buildings. Monitoring, these are systems like nurse call systems, emergency call systems, and things that record vital signs. And also room temperature and refrigeration temperatures. Information and communications technology, that's your data, your phone, and all the wires that connect all those wonderful systems together. And then safety and security, that's your access control, wander management, video surveillance, your intercoms, door releases, those things that keep the residents and staff safe.
Once you have those systems in place, you really need to begin to understand how those systems interface with your operating model. As we walk through this presentation, you'll begin to understand more and more the ability for the elements of your technology platform to speak to each other is really where you drive efficiencies and effectiveness of your systems. So we talk about how do they integrate with the staff and how do they integrate with outside partners that you may have. We also believe that technology has the opportunity, as we all know, to enhance the residents' experiences via communication, the idea of passive monitoring, we call it taking the creepiness out of watching seniors, and enhancing their living experience. So a lot of things to consider when we're talking about getting prepared just to make decisions related to technology. So let's start off with what's happening in the broader senior living industry and where technology plays a role. There are 4 broad categories that we look at as we look at planning for the future. These are things that may not impact us directly today, but the investments we do today are usually meant to last 10, 20 years. So understanding where things are going to go is very important. We're going to talk about the impact of demographics, the idea of consumerism to our industry, the economics of our industry and how that will play a role, and finally, technology. So let's begin with demographics. We've always all seen some form or manner of this slide where we talk about the generations, the greatest generation and the silent generation who we are serving today, and the boomers that are coming along the way. What I really want to just kind of highlight in this is when you look at that mass of population coming towards us, you know that there's going to be some disruption and innovation happening to serve that population group. At every generation, we have had innovation. We've had the onslaught of assisted living with the greatest generation. In this generation of the silent generation, we've seen a lot of memory care advancements. So the baby boomers are going to come with their own innovation. Also, with the demographics, the population is growing. Today, we have about 21 million seniors, 75-plus population. As soon as we're looking at a huge growth of about 37 million of the 75-plus population by 2032. And part of the reason for this is not only the population growth advancement, but also the reason that many of these seniors are living longer. With that anticipated growth, they're also sicker. There are more diagnoses happening that are impacting how we care for this senior population. Alzheimer's cases are growing, obesity is on the rise, and diabetes diagnosis. All this leads to a demand for more personal care, on-call healthcare services, and technology is going to play an important role in that. So in demographics, when we look at strategically planning for it, we really look at the idea that the environments that we create have to address the senior population, address their care needs, and then also create purposeful living environments. The big change that we see coming is a shift in our industry from going to a need-based industry to a want-based industry. People making the choice to come into our communities because of the quality of life that we're providing. Technology allows us to do that. In order to position ourselves to be successful there, we need to understand who our consumer is. So we're going to start talking a little bit like we are retailers or in the hospitality industry, really looking at who it is that we're serving. What's the age cohort? Born between 1946 and 1964. They're a big population, about 10,000 boomers a day for the next 19 years. They're more educated than their predecessors, and they're also far more independent. And they're very demanding. I always tell my friends that I'm just shy of boomers, that they're bossy son of a guns. They also became teenagers somewhere between the 1950s and 1977. These are our disco dancing flower children, right? They also experienced a lot of amazing things, such as a man walking on the moon and the Cold War. And they embraced technologies pretty consistently and comprehensively. Think of television, computers, cell phones that all did not exist at the time that they were born and just slowly evolved into our lives and where they are today. So these consumers are really going to be making their decisions based on a desire to move into communities versus having to move into communities. They're also going to demand, despite their frailty and some of their healthcare needs, they're going to be demanding a high quality of life. And how do you bring that to our residents? Let's look at the economics of it. Along with the vast demographic group that's coming and all of their needs and wants and desires as a consumer, we also have to look at the economic impact. There's their personal wealth, looking at households with a popular income of over $35,000. Today, they're at $8 million. Just in 5 years, that number is going to go to 11 million. So more people are going to be able to afford care. We also know that because of economic impacts, there's going to be changes, and we're all experiencing it in Medicare and Medicaid. We already know that skilled nursing homes are having trending towards about 2 closing a week. At the same time, assisted living, about 7 are opening up a week. What this means is that the population isn't going away. They're just going to less expensive care settings, but the need for care still exists. So how do we provide that? So in economics, we're going to really have to calibrate. This is why I said go back to who you are and what you do, because you have to understand so that you can have the support system and the operating model to meet those needs. There'll also be a lot of value-based purchasing because cost is a critical consideration. The fourth element of the broader industry trends are the technology integrations that we're seeing consumers coming to the table to us. They have very high expectations given the environments that they live in today. They're going to bring electronics. They're going to be used to those electronics. So how do we bring that to the table? And connected technologies, so the Internet of Things. That's going to have a significant impact on our care models. Technology as it impacts care pathways, a connection to healthcare providers, access to healthcare, access when needed to healthcare, all of those elements that we see in a healthcare environment, given that our environments are less expensive for care settings, they're going to come down to us. So we're going to see a trickle down of the technologies we see in healthcare environments coming into seniors' housing. Then finally, technology and how technology can hopefully help us on workforce management. We know along with the population of residents we need to serve that we're going to have challenges staffing to the needs of that population. And technology can be assumed like the Superman suit that some of these caregivers can begin to wear so that they can be more effective and more efficient as they serve our population's needs. So on the technology side of it, what we're really seeing is technology-enabled connected care models and partnerships that allow for care. We're seeing artificial intelligence and predictive analysis, which will allow us to predict challenges which may come ahead and staff to potential predictive needs. And then we're going to see a lot of partnerships related to workforce and the Uberization, as we call it, of care services. Patrick?
Okay, so in the real world, what are the elements that you need to include in your buildings to enable those technologies to function well? Well, there are several things, and you shouldn't consider just one of them because each of them impacts all of the others. So you need to take into consideration how the decisions you make will impact the other elements of your building. The first one is the infrastructure. Those are the places, the telecom rooms, the pathways, the conduits, the boxes, the things that support all of those technologies. The next one is wireless, and wireless is constantly changing and getting better. Anybody who's just had to replace an expensive cell phone will understand how wireless is changing quickly. An exciting new technology, digital electricity. Digital electricity can save you money and make your spaces more flexible. And remote connectivity. You may not have had to consider remote connectivity when you were planning your building in the past, but you might need to do that now. Let's look at each one of these. The first thing is you shouldn't plan just for the specific technologies you're buying now because the cable will outlast those devices. So what are you going to choose? You have two choices, the traditional copper cable, or maybe now you want to consider fiber optic cables. Whatever you choose, you're going to have to not just have a system that's code compliant. We hear so many times from contractors that things are code compliant, but we also need to meet industry standards. So you're probably going to use something called Ethernet to connect your devices together. And Ethernet came from somebody called the IEEE. Well, what do you do with that? Well, your electronics have standards also from a group called TIA. And all of that is connected together with cabling, and you're going to want to use the best practices for your cabling from Bixby. What does all that mean? It all sounds confusing. It's not, because all of those standards work together, and they all work together to make sure everything works smoothly. However, the technology in your building is constantly improving. Back in 1991, Category 5 cable replaced coaxial cable, and you might have heard of Category 5 cable. Well, in 2002, Category 6 cable came along, which was not only faster, it allowed you to send some power over your data cable. And about that time, we started installing something called multi-mode fiber, which was going to future-proof your building. Well, today we're up to Category 6A cable being installed in our buildings. It's still being used, even though it came out in 2008, but the life expectancy of any cable plant is 10 to 12 years. We have a Category 8 cable already that's out there. You're not going to put that in your building. That's to connect very high-speed computers to other very high-speed computers. But that future-proof cable, well, now we have something called single-mode fiber, which is faster and smaller and better than the future-proof cable. The thing to understand is you don't want to buy just for what you need today. You want to think about the unknown and what's going to happen in the future, because it's going to cost a lot of money to go back into your ceilings and floors and replace those cables if you need to. So what are you going to pick? Well, there's some key factors that people consider in any building. The first one, and this is important on a lot of projects, is that copper can transmit both power and data, and that's very important and could be a key factor. Fiber optic cables are much smaller and can transmit larger amounts of data. You could have a single fiber the size of a human hair that transmits your phone and your data and your television signals all to a resident room. Copper, however, even though it can transmit power, has a maximum length, and that limits the distance it can be installed. Fiber has a maximum length, but you won't exceed that within your building. But because of that maximum length, additional telecom rooms and expensive electronics are required. So that's the reason some people might want to choose fiber. Your building's going to last a long time. That cable's going to last a long time. So let's look at what else you might need to consider as you plan your cable plant. Wireless. I've been hearing for decades that all these cables are going to go away because of wireless. But there's more wires in the building now than there were ever. So what kind of wireless are you going to need in your building? Well, you're going to need Wi-Fi, which is your wireless local area network. That is what connects things wirelessly just within your building and in the immediate area surrounding your building. Then there's cellular. Cellular connects you to a service provider outside of the building, like Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint T-Mobile. And near-field communication, which is very popular for devices that you might wear, for smartphones, for tablets, and vital sign equipment. When we look at Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz is what you might be using now. It was very, very popular. However, it's also used by consumer devices like cordless telephones and Bluetooth. So people have had problems with 2.4 gigahertz because of interference. It was fast. It would give you 450 megabits or 600 megabits per second, and it had a large coverage area. We see on this picture a corridor, and there's one access point in the middle of the corridor covering all the rooms. Now there's 5 gigahertz. 5 gigahertz is the latest. It's 2 or 3 times faster at 1,300 megabits per second. However, despite the fact that it's faster, it's got a shorter range, so you're going to need twice as many access points within your building. It also requires more power, and because of that higher data rate, it needs new cables. Some systems require 2 cables, and the new 5 gigahertz access points are requiring that 6A cable. Just adding more access points won't work, however, because you're going to get interference between your systems and your devices. So you've got to properly plan for the new infrastructure. You can't just add access points. And putting a device in the hallway and expecting it to cover may not work. You can see on the right we have a 5 gigahertz access point put in where the 4 gigahertz was. And if you can see where the blue areas are, we have coverage. But all those white and gray areas on the exteriors of the rooms, there's no coverage for resident devices or your staff devices. Cellular. You might need cellular within your building. And right now you're probably using 4G, known as LTE. LTE was very popular because depending on where you live, it delivered data to your smartphone along with text and telephone. However, now there's 5G, and if you live in an area where 5G is installed, you're seeing lots of advertisements. It's 3 times as fast as LTE. However, because it's got a higher frequency, the coverage is not as great. It has trouble with solid objects, and because of that higher coverage area, You might not get 5G coverage in your building where you used to have LTE coverage, and you might have to add a cellular booster system to your building if cellular is something that's important to you. The new buzzword is digital electricity, which just is a buzzword for a technical term, power over Ethernet. It's a game changer because now you can save money. We can send power over the same wires that we're sending data over. So you don't need all that material for electrical wires and the material for data wires. But more importantly, in a lot of areas of the country, the labor rate for installing data cables is lower than the labor rate for electrical. So you're going to save on material and labor. And the big key to it is it's pretty easy to move a data cable. It's difficult and expensive to move regular electricity, and so it makes your system very, very flexible. However, like anything else, there's things you got to be careful of. First of all is the distances. Remember when voltage drop is a big problem, so there's a limitation on copper. It's not available over fiber optic cable. It's only available over copper cable, and it won't work with wireless. I had somebody recently who told me, well, you can send that Ethernet over wireless, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, and you can send power over Ethernet. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I want the power over Ethernet and Ethernet over wireless. I said, no, you can't do both. You can't combine those together. Another thing you need to consider in your buildings is telehealth. Telehealth has a projected 20% annual growth rate because we're trying to limit the readmission rates of our senior population and manage healthcare costs. But there's some things that need to be considered. The Facilities Guideline Institute, FGI, has guidelines for your physical needs for virtual healthcare. So things you have to consider are space for your equipment. Even if you put it on a cart, you've got to store it somewhere. Bandwidth now becomes very, very important. In order to get accurate results, there needs to be smooth communication between your building and the doctor. Lighting levels, not just how bright the lights are, but also the color temperature. You don't want people to look too gray or too red, because that's going to affect their diagnosis. Sound. Obviously, both sides need to be able to hear everything clearly during that conversation, but that creates privacy issues. So patient confidentiality is something you've got to plan into those spaces. And something you may not have considered about is infection control. So it's more than just putting in boxes and conduits for your cables. There's a lot to consider with telehealth. Remote connectivity is really important. We're seeing it right now with social engagement. It's going to be required. If you're not requiring it now, soon you will. It's multi-generational, allowing residents to connect with family and even with staff. Some of your staff has never lived without a cell phone. They've just always had one available. So there's the decisions that you've got to make in your projects. Will the residents purchase their own access from a provider like the cable company? Will you furnish the bandwidth to them? So what happens when those residents leave their own resident room and go out into common spaces and want to use their devices? Or what happens when your staff wants to use devices within the resident rooms? All those things have to be thought about. But most importantly, each of those things are using more bandwidth, and that all has a cumulative effect on your backbone cabling and the internet connection to the building. Remote connectivity or software as a service is something you may have heard of, but not really thought too much about. But it's going to use up bandwidth. And in the coming age, by using blockchain and other secure technologies, many of the services and software that you use today will come from outside the building. Some of you may be using hybrid software as a service now from point-click care or e-resident care. We should expect the remote portion of all of our software services to expand and grow. Residents and their families may even want to be connected to remote services. They may track medications with apps like Pillboxy, or they might have personal caregiver apps where they keep track of their loved one's symptoms or changes in their health status. They may even have geolocation trackers. Your building systems might be using software as a service now. Some of you are already using electronic access control or video surveillance systems that are hosted somewhere, because the advantages are that you don't have to update the software in every building. It just gets updated everywhere automatically, and you can view all of your buildings at once. So we have to expect that the connectivity to the building is going to have to grow as remote connectivity becomes a part of our software delivery. So now that we looked at the technologies changing your physical infrastructure, what are the trends in senior living? Well, we have machines talking to machines. We call that the Internet of Things. We have artificial intelligence that allows machines to make decisions based on patterns, not just linear on or off functions. And we have connections to the network that allows one point to change multiple systems. Now, that's a smart building. And then connectivity's got to be where all those devices are, not just at the director's office. So we need connectivity in resident rooms, in common spaces, at the back of house spaces, at doors, at lighting devices, and even for your HVAC systems. So the amount of data and those wires you have in your building is going to expand. You may already be integrating systems within your building. Your wander management system may report attempted elopements on your nurse call devices. Your smartphones may unlock doors or show a video of who's pressing the intercom button. Your access control system might not release a door if a wander resident is standing in front of the door and loitering, but there's much more integration to come in the future.
So as we look at all of the technologies and the decisions that have to go, we'll now look at the emerging technologies that are coming into our communities. As Patrick just outlined, there's a lot of stuff that's already within our communities. How do we build on that and bring the technologies that our residents are going to be bringing with them? So resident engagement, the ability for our residents to connect with their family members, their caregivers, and even to more purposeful things like virtual traveling, foodie things, all those things that kind of add value to their lives. Technology is going to allow us to do that, and there's going to be a demand for that. We'll be also doing wearables, which are changing people's behavior patterns. All those are going to begin to come into our communities and be a part of the protocol of how we care for our seniors. The idea of passive monitoring through our buildings via using radar or smart tiles or smart light fixtures that allow us to passively monitor somebody's safety and security. It takes the creepiness factor out of things, and there's a lot of families that prefer that to having somebody constantly coming and having to check up on somebody. Technology, you can also see when we talk about these elements, how it can maximize our staff members because the building itself becomes part of the infrastructure that we're using for them. So when we're looking at the emerging trends in technology, we're looking at resident engagement, we're looking at passive monitoring within the buildings, we're looking at smart buildings and components, the ability to allow our residents to continue to have control. There's a really good quote from Maria Montessori. She says, every time you do something for me, you've taken something away from me. So the more control we can continue to give somebody that's aging, the better their quality of life is. And then the virtual concierge, the idea that you can call and get things, your needs met on call. The Uberization of services will also become a part of a smart building environment. We talked a lot about data gathering and artificial intelligence. I think that it's going to begin to play a massive role in how we age in this country. And the more data that we collect, the more we can predict what could become an occurrence that costs a lot of money, really impacts your quality of life, the more these things will get embraced. We have to plan for those changes. They're not there now, but they're going to happen. And they're happening already unbeknownst to us. You know that when you go shopping and click something that you like on one website, your Amazon site sends you information on that document. Same kind of idea. We're going to see more and more of that coming our way.
You might already be using artificial intelligence. There's an app that some people have on their phone called Waze. Waze gathers information from all the cars on a particular road, and it can tell you the best route to take to get to your destination. However, it learns from that, and you could tell it where you want to go, and it will tell you in advance when you should leave on another day so that you arrive on time. that's an example of where artificial intelligence is affecting your life.
Right, and we in the senior living industry, we see AI playing a role in event response. We see them in cost savings on operations side, and we also see it in increased marketability because we can offer more to our residents and their families. Smart buildings, the trend for smart buildings, we are seeing this all the time. The idea that we can reduce energy within our buildings, that we can monitor and alarm our buildings remotely. I can actually set somebody into my building by setting a door alarm off my cell phone. A lot of flexibility given into our buildings. That the idea of the challenge for our industry is to build brick and mortar that can actually adapt and be flexible to future trends and the unknown. The one thing we do know is there's change happening. Technology and smart buildings allows us to adapt easier than we have historically been able to. We're able to report on how our buildings are functioning so we can be far more laser focused on how to run them efficiently. We can manage our maintenance and our capital investments year over year within a smart building, and we can improve reliability. These communities need to be safe environments for our residents and the staff members.
Smart devices can be reprogrammed. You could take lighting fixtures and you could take a dining area and reprogram it to only light up a part of it. Or you could reset your lighting to create a mood so that you create an emotional response for an event. They also can let you know their status. So they could report a failure directly to your maintenance department without waiting for someone else to find out that that device is not working. Security is one of the areas where we're using smart building technologies. So where we have security systems, we need to keep in mind that this is someone's residence, right? The building should not look like a prison. And that's why edge devices become so important. So whoever's designing your security needs to understand the risks. Senior living is unique. Most of the time, we're trying to keep people in. We're not just worried about keeping bad actors from committing criminal acts. As such, we've got to get that cabling out to the boundaries of the spaces where the intelligent devices are going to function, so that digital electricity becomes important. And remember when we said there was a limitation on cable? Well, when you're figuring out your cable distances, you've got to make sure you include your security devices, because your security devices are going to want to use digital electricity to save you money.
So let's talk about change. You have to look at the connectivity of all of the elements that you have there. We know that, as Patrick talked about, all the different technologies and the systems, the ability for each of these things to stay connected and communicate to each other is really where value is driven. So as you're looking at different technologies to embrace within your communities, our advice always is to look not only at the singular technology, but the systems and how it connects to everybody else. Tons of background decisions that have to do with technology are really not about the technology themselves, but how you implement the technology. It is about the expectations of the residents and the families. It's about the staff's familiarity. We know that technology, if not embraced, is really not going to be used to its best effectiveness. So you have to ensure that you're meeting expectation, that people know how to use the technology, and that they're all integrated and continue to move faster. Let's talk about operational efficiencies also. On top of kind of the connectivity and the quality of life improvement, technology also allows us to communicate and keep that bridge of communication around our cared ones up to date with our families and their caregivers. It allows the staff to be far more streamlined and be where they are needed rather than having to cover everything in order to meet needs. And so we can leverage our staff members far better. If any of you have gone to hotels, I think Marriott has a couple hotels that actually have robots that come and work for them because they figured out where they need staff, they put staff, and where technology can step in, they're allowing technology to step in and provide those services. And then on the operations side and our just operational efficiency and cost saving, because we're optimizing how we bring staff in to serve our resident population. So Patrick and I have talked about a lot of trends that impact our industry. We've talked about trends and innovation within and considerations within technology. We're going to talk a little bit about how we perceive really optimal strategic planning for technology is. And so I think this is as important as how you vet the technologies that you're going to take into your building.
So part of planning a project is not just picking the technology that you want, but understanding what the impact of that technology is upon the building and the residents and staff and how they're going to use it in the building, and to get the technology in the right places and have it integrated so that it works with the systems that are necessary for a smoothly functioning building. The information should make it really clear that that's got to be planned for early in the process. And space has got to be provided in the building, not just for the equipment, but also for the infrastructure and the power and the cables that are going to support all of that technology. That becomes part of your building planning.
Absolutely. And I think to reiterate the fact that technology is not just like a chair you sit on. Technology now is a part of your operating plan. It is how you serve your residents and their needs. So it has to be a part of the very early planning phases. We know construction and renovation projects are very, very complicated. Historically, when we go into these projects, we obviously have architects and planners, we have our engineering, our MEP structural, we have interior designers and food service design. Those low voltage technology components that fundamentally support our operating have really been in the back burner and are brought in. We have clients that come to us 2 weeks before construction drawings are due asking for us for the technology package. At that point, you're way too far into the design and commitment of the project to have an effective, connected technology platform for your community. So Patrick's going to talk you through kind of how this technology design gets incorporated traditionally.
So we see several ways that people are incorporating technology into their buildings. The first way is that there's no technology design contract at all, that the building structure is built and then the technology is going to be retrofitted in later. That means that there's no space to house that equipment and there's no infrastructure. There's no power for those devices. There's no cabling for those devices. And the building, even though it's a brand new building, you can see the results where there's cables run across the floor or there's wire mold put on the wall, and it just doesn't look and function the way that it could have. Another way is that the decision is made to let the electrical engineer, who's probably not specialized in senior living, just take care of the technology, because after all, those copper cables use electricity. That's part of what an electrical engineer does. Well, the electrical engineer may not understand the way that those systems impact the residents and staff. So it's just something else that's put on his plate along with the lighting systems and the fire alarm systems. And so what you're going to be provided is a list of parts and specifications from their preferred manufacturer. And on top of that, you're going to have a full scoop of labor hours that doesn't include any customized programming or dedicated integration of those systems. And that's a pretty popular way that people are designing their systems today. Another way is you just select a vendor and you let the vendor do the design for their system, and each system has their own people come in, and they don't talk to anyone else. So there's no integration between those systems, and there's probably very little integration with the architect or the engineers to make sure that everything's going to function properly. And finally, you may just select a great technology, and then you have an installer who's not very familiar with the technology try to do their best. This may be your most expensive option, because what you're going to wind up with is a lot of change orders, a lot of finger pointing, and certainly you're not going to have the integration into the building and structures that you probably wish you had. And many of you, I can tell from the comments I get, have experienced that on many of your projects. There's a new way that can be used to make sure that your technology, as we move into the future and technology becomes an important part of your process, is integrated right from the beginning. And that's to have a dedicated technology designer included on the project. And that technology designer is included as part of the design team. with everyone else on the design team, working directly with the architect so that the equipment, the infrastructure, the power, the cabling, the spaces are all part of the built environment. And the earlier that you get the technology design incorporated into the planning, the better the project outcome is going to be.
Absolutely. So how do they come together? I love when we start talking about the integration of technology, right? So if you think about starting with the building, which is where like the heartbeat of your technology system is, you talk about the connectivity, the flexibility and adaptability of those systems. You talk about smart buildings where the building themselves become part of your operating model. And then you talk about managing that facility through a facility management system. Radiating out of that, with the right system that connects and speaks to each other, you can really begin to integrate staff within the building and drive efficiency, operating efficiencies. You can also connect those staff members to outside partnerships. We know that as we continue to get challenged with staffing to our needs, that we're going to have to look at outside partners to bring some of those components into it. We're seeing that because people are asking for variety. Remember the consumer, that's going to play an important role of that. Technology is going to be a part of how we meet some of those consumer needs. And then the ability with a well-placed technology package, you're going to be able to attract younger caregivers and younger employees. Staff retention, turnover, reducing that because you have a good, solid infrastructure of technology that works in efficient building can allow you to do that. And finally, residents and technology. We already know that our collective behavior patterns are changing with wearables. We also know that consumer electronics are a huge portion of how people live in their lives today. I always say that when we plan for senior living, we should be looking at the environments they sit in today, because if we can't meet some of those expectations they have of their living environments, they're not going to come into our communities and live with us. So it becomes a big marketability thing. The idea of using components like virtual reality that connect us, continue to keep us connected to the outside world, to the things that interest us, the university and education, the arts, the sports, anything that is your interest, this senior population is going to require that. And a good technology package that connects you will allow you to bring that to the table. So we wanted to walk through, as you've heard, there are lots of things happening via trends. There's of the broader industry. There's also a lot of trends happening within technology and innovation. But at the end of the day, you really have to take a look at, you have to have a lot of considerations being taken into account before you settle on the right technology, because not one size fits all. So first of all, we're going to talk about ownership. Patrick brought up a really good thing. If you let our residents bring in their own technology, and then your staff members have their own technology, and then your building has its own component of technology, how do those all work together? You need to have a philosophy for yourself or a strategy for yourself as an organization as how you're going to purchase your technology packages. That's number one consideration.
We talked about allowing connectivity to the outside world, whether it's by residents, by your software, or by your systems. Every one of those connections to the outside world also becomes a vulnerability. So along with the benefits, there comes risks. So you've got to make sure you've got a good cybersecurity plan and that you account for every piece of technology, including your cameras, your access control readers, your electronic health records. All those things become vulnerabilities that you need to protect and make sure that you close down to keep your network safe.
Then let's talk about policies. When you have technologies, you then have to have policies to manage how those technologies are accessed, how the information is shared, what information is shared, when is it shared, is it real-time communication. Those policies and thinking through that are going to be a really important component of your operating model. So this is why technology and low-voltage technology systems are such an important consideration from the beginning of planning for a new community.
And you've got to make sure that as you select the infrastructure to work with that technology, that you take into account the fact, again, that those cables will be there for a long time. You want to choose a system that can be built upon. You want to plan for the unknown in the future because the cabling will outlast the technology that you're buying right now. And you want the ability to expand and be able to reuse those cables in the future. I had a contractor tell me, well, I'm not putting in that cable that you specified. I found this Cat5 cable, remember back in 1991, on the internet. It was absolutely the cheapest cable I could find anywhere, and that's what we're going to put in because I think it'll support this device. There's got to be thought to the future, and you've got to look at your long-term needs so you get a good return on the investment in that cable, and you're not going back and replacing it every few years.
Excellent. So then let's continue with this. So project management, this is a really important thing. As you can see, there's lots of considerations when we talk about a technology design. Who, what, where. You really need to have somebody, an owner's representative that is managing your project, not a construction project manager, but a person that's looking at your technology systems with a lens to your operating model, which is based on who you serve, right? I keep going back to that, the tenet of you start with who you serve. So this owner's representative needs to understand what you're trying to accomplish through your technology package and ensure that that technology is optimized to meet your needs.
Okay. The building infrastructure, if you include the right mixture of infrastructure, you can support your devices for a very long time. And so you want adequate space for your equipment. You want to include the right power in the right locations for your equipment. You don't want extension cords running across your floor. You want to provide boxes with conduit so that you can replace those cables when you need to and have future changes and moves. You're going to make an investment, again, that outlasts the technology you're now purchasing. So don't be short-sighted and take out that infrastructure that takes away your flexibility to expand in your building as time goes forward.
Let's talk about regulations. So this is something that we kind of all forget about till suddenly somebody raises a red flag and says, oh my gosh, the codes don't allow me to do that. So as technology advances and as they innovate, and we talk about buildings actually enabling caregivers and becoming a part of the care component that drives efficiencies for staffing, well, none of that will be pertinent if the regulatory environment doesn't match up to that. Because if indeed the building can begin to do some of the passive monitoring and you can reduce headcount of staffing, then does the regulatory environment, your licensing allow you to do that? So somebody knowledgeable about all those components who can walk your local regulatory folks or you or the technology systems designers through that process is going to be really important. Don't forget that regulatory environment. It's an important consideration into your technology package.
And you need to make sure that you select the right design professionals. You need somebody that can design for all your systems, for your audiovisual systems, and understand the dynamics of a senior population. Senior population needs more light. They don't hear as well. Those are all things you need to take into consideration. You need to think about the monitoring. There are a lot of devices now recording vital signs. It's more than just a hardwired nurse call system. So you have wireless systems that integrate with lots of other devices. You need someone that understands that. You need your safety and security systems to work seamlessly to keep people in the spaces where they need to be. And you need someone who knows how to work with the architect so the door hardware matches the systems. We always hear these horror stories at the end of the project, the doors don't work right because this system works and it doesn't work with that system. All that needs to be part of the design. And then finally, that communication system, that cabling and wireless, needs to work with all of those systems. It needs to work with the lighting, with the HVAC, with the security system, with the audiovisual. So your designer has to be able to work with all those systems. So you want somebody who understands senior living, but who also understands whatever the technologies are that you've chosen to put into your project.
So where are we going to leave you with? We've talked through a lot of different elements with you. We want you to continue looking as you look at the technology that supports your operating. You focus on the value. The value is not only in the individual technology systems, but also in how they connect and speak to each other, how it's supported through your policies, how it's supported through the regulatory environment. So continue focusing on the value that it brings to your residents and your caregivers. view the whole solution. You really have to look at all of the component pieces of the technology package. It is that's where you optimize it, and that's where you really drive value for them. Focus on the usability. It's useless having a system that is far too complex for the users. It has to start the other direction. It has to support what you do. You can push the envelope on it, but always come back to that usability component of it. And then test, and test. You need to bring everybody along on this path of technology integration. You need to understand where you're going to go, how you're going to go. But if your constituents and your staff members, caregivers, family members are not buying into what you're bringing, it will not be adopted. It'll be wasted money. So continue to test it, understand what your needs are.
And you want to make sure you understand that as you incorporate and bring new technologies into the building, you're affecting the safety and the security of the residents, the staff, the family members, and visitors to your project. So think about those integrations. Think about what that does to your network. And remember that the real world of technology is what you want, not a fictional world that exists in marketing material from some technology manufacturer. You want to think about how should those systems communicate with your staff? What works best for your operating model? And how should those systems communicate with your outside operating partners? So all those are very, very important in the real world operation of technology within your building, and things that you need to think about and make clear decisions that everyone on the design team understands.
Technology in senior living continues to be one of the largest elements that's changing the experiences of our residents, their families, and their staff. And as you incorporate these changes, remember that along the way, not only where you're going or how you're going, you really need to understand why technology is important, because it is going to be such a large part of the transformation happening in our industry. In order to allow better technology and to adapt to those changes, you need to bring everyone along for the ride. That is the only way you're going to drive greater efficiencies in your operating model, but also satisfaction for your families and their extended loved ones. That's all we have for you today. We have time for some questions, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. The first one is thoughts on security and privacy when using wireless technology.
So the wireless technology makes everything on that network vulnerable. And so I would recommend you segment your technology so that your devices and the devices used by your staff are in one segment of the network that's very well secured, and you have another segment that's more open for residents, and then maybe guests, visitors, or family may have another section of the network. But you don't want to just have an open network and allow everybody to access anything that's on that network. You want to make sure that devices that you're using, especially when you have health records, that portion of the network is locked down and secure and not vulnerable to whatever the grandchildren may be doing on their devices. And you don't want to be sharing the network with them. So again, when I said you want to make those decisions about whether residents have to provide their own network access that maybe they buy from the cable company, and maybe they have some kind of wireless device within their room. Well, what happens when they're in a common area? You don't want to put all of your equipment at risk by just having an open network and allowing anyone on there.
All right, thank you. Next question. Any thoughts on how to assess the idiosyncrasies of different markets' willingness to adopt new tech? Example, rural versus urban, large versus small cities, IL, AL, MC, SNF.
That's a great question. Wow. I think this is where fundamentally understanding the population you're serving and in the location that you're serving is really, really important, because when you're if you're going in and developing a new community in a very rural community, a rural marketplace, historically we would look at, the demand matrix and how much competition is out in the marketplace, how many qualified senior residents are there, what their incomes are. Now you really have to get to that consumer component of it. You need to understand what what that consumer is going to be looking for in those environments, because that's what you need to match up for. That's what's going to attract those residents to come in. So I think technology is adding another layer of research that needs to be done around consumer preferences before you begin to develop your technology system for your building.
And I think you also want to look at what technologies those residents are looking for and what they might be bringing with them. Because if you have 100 different pieces of equipment in your building, at some point they're going to need some kind of support. And they're not going to want to just call the grandchildren for support. So if you provide a device and you know how to administer that one device that gives them that function that they want, then you can control that device and you can work with it. There's no way that you would be able to support every device that everybody's going to bring in. The knowledge is just too vast for what your staff is going to have at that location. So depending on where you are, whether you're in a rural area or in a different area where maybe you have AL residents or IL residents, they're going to have different technologies that they're looking for. And it's not just the technologies, but what devices are you going to allow and how are you going to support those devices? And again, the cybersecurity comes into play with those devices. Like, how are you going to secure the devices? So if the resident provides a device, you're going to have very little control over that device.
I think the other part of urban versus rural also is access to, just as you said, the management of the systems. Because if you go into more rural communities and you just don't have the locally available Geek Squad to come and monitor it, you really have to pay attention to what it is you put into your communities. And that's relevant everywhere. But I think the further away you go from urban centers, that becomes a larger and larger challenge. So as you're planning for technology, we keep talking about it. It has to meet your operating model, but also take a look at the life cycle costs of managing those systems and ensuring that they're working optimally. You have to make sure that that support is there for you.
Great. Okay. A couple more questions. What suggestions do you have for residents and families that are hesitant to adopt new tech? That's a really interesting one because as the population that's coming into our communities is shifting, the generation that's here today, they're adapting much slower. They are adapting a lot more than we anticipate they are. I think it's you have to do it in baby steps. It's by peer group. It's you have to understand who your consumer is and develop processes to get people to understand what the benefit of a technology and this communication platform could bring to the quality of life for the seniors and their families. So it's not easy, but I think it begins with understanding who's there, being patient with it. Using other peer-to-peer training has worked really well when it's not somebody from the outside that's somewhat threatening doing the training of new technologies, but you actually bring someone within your organization to help with some of those that's already been trained on it. So I think there's lots of different creative ways to look at how you can bring people up. Great. So this next question is for a specific customer, and I think we'll get back in touch with you for sure, but I wanted to just bring it up as a question. Can you approach our corporate office to be proactive to plan for upgrades for next year by surveying our building and existing systems? Our building is 30 years old and only has Wi-Fi in the clubhouse and not resident apartments. Is that something?
I think we see that frequently, and so one of the things that needs to be done is to do an assessment of the building and what the infrastructure is. And then once you know what you've got, take a look at where you want to go. What's your long-term path? And don't focus just solely on immediate needs because people get short-sighted. And as I mentioned a couple times, they think about, I'm going to buy this device and I want to put the infrastructure in for this device. But that device is only going to have a life of a few years and it's going to be replaced by another device. So you want to think about the overall infrastructure in the building and what you've got, and then put in a system that will support multiple devices and multiple systems and allow you to have flexibility as you move forward. I know I just was at a senior living facility where they had Wi-Fi only in the director's office. They didn't have Wi-Fi anywhere else in the whole building. Yet they had devices in the building that were looking for Wi-Fi, and that Wi-Fi was not available. And that's why only some of the devices were working and some of them weren't. So that overall assessment is really what's critical to making sure that things will function, because no longer are people expecting internet in just the clubhouse, right? They're expecting that they're going to be able to use their tablet wherever they go. If they go to the dining room or they go back to their room, there's got to be some kind of policy to deal with that.
For sure. All right, and that is all the questions we have. So thank you again to Gaurie and Patrick for presenting today, and thank you all for attending. We very much appreciate it, and we hope to see you next time.